Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive into the science of learning. It's exciting. We're going deep with this book, How Learning Works. 7 research-based principles for smart teaching.
Oh, yeah. I've heard good things about that one.
Me too. And you know what I really appreciate about this book?
What's that?
Is that it's written by authors who've actually, worked with college faculty,
Oh, wow.
helping them apply these principles in real classrooms.
So it's not just theoretical, it's practical.
Exactly. It's not just theory. It's like, rubber meets the road stuff that you can actually use.
That's what we like.
Yeah. So have you ever had that experience where you explain something like super clearly to a student,
Oh, yeah, all the time.
but they just don't get it?
Happens all the time.
It can be so frustrating.
Yes.
And this book actually dives into this whole phenomenon through the lens of what they call prior knowledge,
Okay.
which is their first principle.
I like it.
So what do they mean by prior knowledge?
Well, they basically argue that students don't come to us as blank slates, right? They have all these experiences, their own understanding.
Their own baggage.
Yeah, exactly. Which can either help or hinder their learning.
So true. The book gives this example of a psychology professor who's struggling to teach the concept of negative reinforcement. Even with, really clear examples, students kept defaulting to thinking of it as punishment.
Interesting.
Like their existing understanding was getting in the way of this new information.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The research actually shows we tend to filter new information through the lens of what we already know.
That's fascinating.
So if a student has a misconception, just, telling them the right answer might not be enough. You have to kind of address those misconceptions head on.
Makes total sense. So what can we do about it? The book does get, into the practical nitty-gritty, which I appreciate.
Yeah, they have some great suggestions. One is to talk to colleagues who teach, prerequisite courses.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you can kind of anticipate those common misconceptions and address them proactively.
It's like a heads up.
Exactly. A heads up on what they might already be thinking.
I like that. Another strategy they suggest is to look for patterns of errors in student work.
Well, that's a good one.
Which I think we all do to some extent.
Yeah, for sure.
But they're saying, this can give you really valuable clues about where students are getting tripped up.
It's like becoming a detective.
Totally. Like what's going on in their minds.
Exactly.
This is reminding me, we also need to be aware of the difference between knowing what and knowing how.
Oh, that's huge.
It's one thing for a student to be able to define a term.
Right.
It's another thing to actually be able to use that knowledge in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. It's the difference between declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge.
So it's not just about, memorizing facts. It's about being able to apply that knowledge in real-world situations.
Exactly.
Okay, so if students are missing some crucial prior knowledge,
Right.
how do we address that?
Well, the book has some strategies for that, too.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's really about meeting students where they are and building from there.
I like that. Okay, so that leads perfectly into the next principle, which is all about organization.
Okay.
So tell me, is it really true that how students organize information actually impacts their ability to learn?
It's huge.
Really?
The book really emphasizes that.
Because I'm thinking if they know the facts, shouldn't that be enough?
It's not just about having all those facts, floating around in your head.
Right.
You need a way to connect them, see the relationships between them.
So it's like having a filing system for your brain.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
The book contrasts these two professors, one teaching art history, the other anatomy and physiology.
Okay. Very different subjects.
Right. But they both find that their students struggle to see the big picture.
Even if they've memorized all the individual facts.
Exactly. It's like they have all the pieces, but they can't put the puzzle together.
That's a great analogy. So how do we help students develop that kind of, organized thinking?
Well, the book uses this really cool visual of knowledge organization to show the difference between how a novice thinks about a topic versus an expert.
Okay. I'm visualizing this.
So a novice might have a bunch of disconnected pieces of information.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas an expert has a more interconnected hierarchical structure.
So it's like the difference between looking at a pile of puzzle pieces
Yes.
versus seeing the completed picture.
Exactly.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
And they use this fascinating analogy about chess experts.
Oh, yeah. I heard that one.
They don't necessarily have better memories than novices. They just see patterns, relationships, that novices miss.
That's so interesting.
And this applies to learning anything new.
So it's about helping students see those patterns, make those connections.
That's really powerful.
It is. And the book suggests, using concept maps to visually represent knowledge.
Okay.
Explicitly connecting new concepts to ones they've learned before, and encouraging students to play with different ways of organizing information.
It's about giving them the tools to build those mental frameworks.
It's about empowering students to become active organizers of their own learning.
Yes. And that empowerment ties directly into the next principle, which is all about motivation.
Oh, motivation. That's something I struggle with even in my own life.
I think we all do.
So what does this book say about how we can motivate our students to really want to learn?
Well, this is a big one because motivation is really the driving force behind learning, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's that spark that makes someone want to put in the effort.
But sometimes it feels like pulling teeth.
Right.
To get students engaged.
The book shares a few examples of that very struggle. Like there's this one story about a history professor.
Oh, no.
Whose students just aren't feeling it when it comes to working with primary sources.
We don't get the value of it.
They're like, why do we even need these old documents?
I've been there.
And then there's another professor who teaches this really challenging science course. And she's like warning them about the difficulty level and maybe inadvertently demotivated students by doing that.
I can see that happening.
So how do we find that sweet spot?
Right.
Where students are challenged but not overwhelmed.
It's a delicate balance.
It is. Well, the book breaks motivation down into these three key levers.
Okay.
Value, expectancy, and environment.
And they all need to be working together.
They do. You can't just focus on one.
Okay, so let's break those down. So value is about believing that what you're learning is actually valuable.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And expectancy is about believing that you can actually succeed if you put in the effort.
That's so important.
It is. Yeah. It's about having a sense of self-efficacy.
Okay, so we've got value, we've got expectancy, and what about environment?
Environment is all about creating a supportive and encouraging space to learn.
I like that.
Because if students feel constantly judged or like they're set up to fail,
oh, yeah,
their motivation's going to plummet.
Absolutely. So how can instructors actually boost motivation in the classroom? Do we have to do like a song and dance routine every day?
Maybe that would help.
I'm not sure I have those skills.
But no, the book actually says that even small changes can make a big difference.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of small changes are we talking about?
Well, for one, you can try connecting the course content to your students' lives, their passions.
I like that.
Help them see how what they're learning is relevant to their own goals and interests.
Make it personal.
Exactly.
Right.
And then there's the design of the assignments themselves.
Okay.
You want to create assignments that are challenging but achievable.
Right.
Because if they're too easy, they'll get bored. If they're too hard, they'll just give up.
It's that Goldilocks zone.
You got it.
Yeah.
And finally, don't underestimate the power of just creating a supportive, inclusive classroom environment.
Oh, that's huge.
When students feel respected, valued, they're much more likely to take risks, engage with the material.
It all comes back to that safe space to learn.
It does.
This is so interesting. I'm starting to see how all these principles are connected.
Me too. They really build on each other.
You can't have motivation without understanding the role of prior knowledge and organization.
Right.
And you can't create an effective learning environment without addressing all three.
Exactly. They're all intertwined.
Okay. This is already blowing my mind. I'm ready for principle number 4, which is mastery.
Mastery.
Yeah.
Let's dive in.
This one might seem obvious.
Yeah.
But I think it's easy to forget that learning complex skills takes more than just showing up and trying hard.
Absolutely.
It's about understanding those component skills, practicing them deliberately,
right,
integrating them, and knowing when and where to apply them.
It's a process.
This makes me think about when I was learning to play the piano. I spent hours just mindlessly practicing the same piece over and over again.
Oh, yeah.
But I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing or how I could improve.
It was just rote repetition.
Exactly. It wasn't until I started breaking down the piece into smaller sections and really focusing on specific techniques that I actually started to get better.
That's a perfect example of what the book calls deliberate practice.
Deliberate practice.
It's not just going through the motions. It's being intentional focus on your goals.
And this is something we need to teach our students.
We do. They don't always come in knowing how to do that.
So how can we help students develop mastery, especially when we're dealing with complex skills?
Well, they use this great example of an acting class.
Okay.
Where students are struggling to integrate skills they've learned in isolation.
Hmm.
So they can do things like phonetic transcription on paper.
Okay.
But when it comes to applying it in a performance, they freeze up.
I can see how that would happen.
Right? It's like they have all the individual pieces, but they haven't figured out how to put them all together yet.
So true. And I think this speaks to that idea of the curse of expertise.
The curse of expertise.
Which the book talks about.
Tell me more about that.
It's this idea that what's easy for us as experts can be incredibly challenging for novices.
Oh, yeah, because we chunk information differently. We see patterns that they miss.
Exactly. It's like we're speaking a different language.
Totally. And that's why it's so crucial to break down skills into smaller steps, provide structured practice, and be mindful of cognitive overload.
Right. We can't just throw a bunch of information at them and expect them to figure it out on their own.
Nope. We have to scaffold their learning.
Scaffolding, that's a good word.
Give them the support they need to build up their skills and confidence.
And then eventually they can take the scaffolding away.
Exactly.
And don't forget about providing opportunities for real-world application.
Oh, that's so important.
That helps them see how the skills they're learning are actually relevant.
And useful.
I'm starting to see how all these principles are interconnected.
They are. It's like a web.
It's not just about individual techniques. It's about creating a whole learning ecosystem.
I like that.
That supports student success. Okay, speaking of support, how about principle number 5?
What's number 5?
Practice and feedback.
Ah, two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely. When it comes to effective learning.
For sure. The book highlights that effective practice helps solidify skills and feedback guides improvement.
So it's about making sure students are practicing the right things.
Yes.
And getting the right kind of guidance to help them improve.
Exactly.
You know, it's funny. I was just talking to a colleague who was complaining about his students' writing.
Oh, no.
He was like, I give them detailed feedback, but they don't seem to be getting any better. And then there was another professor I talked to who was surprised to find that her students were more focused on making their presentations look flashy than on the actual content.
Style over substance.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think both of those situations could benefit from applying this principle.
I think so too, because the book argues that even when students put in the effort, they might be practicing the wrong things or not getting the kind of feedback that actually helps them improve.
They might not even realize what they're doing wrong.
Right. Exactly.
So it's not just about practice, it's about what the book calls deliberate practice.
Deliberate practice.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. Deliberate practice is all about being intentional, having clear goals, and pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone.
Okay.
It's not just going through the motions. It's about actively working towards improvement.
I like that. So how can we encourage our students to engage in deliberate practice?
Well, one important thing is to provide clear goals and criteria for success.
Okay.
Because if they don't know what they're aiming for,
right,
it's hard to practice effectively.
That makes sense. I've found that giving students examples of high-quality work can be really helpful, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It gives them a concrete model to strive for.
Absolutely. And, of course, feedback is crucial.
Feedback.
But it needs to be the right kind of feedback.
Okay, so what does good feedback look like in this context?
Well, good feedback is specific, timely focused on helping students move closer to their goals.
Okay.
It's about providing them with the information they need to make adjustments and improve their performance.
So it's not just about pointing out their mistakes.
No.
It's about giving them concrete suggestions for how to do better next time.
Exactly.
This is really resonating with me. I'm realizing that I could be much more intentional about the way I give feedback.
I think we can all benefit from that.
And what about peer feedback?
Oh, peer feedback is great. Students can learn so much from each other.
I agree. I think it helps them develop those critical thinking skills, see things from different perspectives.
Absolutely. And it takes some of the pressure off of you as the instructor.
I appreciate that. Okay. I think I'm ready to tackle the next principle, which is development and climate.
This one's a little more nuanced.
It feels like it.
This principle is all about recognizing that students aren't just intellects. They're whole people,
right,
with their own social and emotional lives.
They have lives outside of the classroom.
Exactly. And their development and the classroom climate significantly impacts their learning.
That's a powerful statement. Can you give me a concrete example of how this plays out in the classroom?
Well, the book describes this scenario where a classroom discussion about economics takes this sharp turn into this heated debate about race.
Oh, wow.
Leaving the professor feeling totally flustered and unsure how to proceed.
That sounds intense.
It was. And it really highlights the importance of understanding the whole student.
Right.
And how their development and the classroom climate can have this big impact on their learning experience.
It's all connected.
It is. Students aren't just brains on sticks.
Right.
They come with all these experiences, beliefs, emotions that shape how they interact with the material and with each other.
So how do we navigate those complexities as educators?
It's tough, but the book emphasizes that it starts with understanding where students are in their own personal journeys.
Makes sense.
It mentions the Chickering model of student development, which highlights these 7 vectors of development.
7 vectors.
From competence to purpose. It's a framework for understanding how students grow and evolve as individuals.
So it's not just about their intellectual development, but also their social, emotional, and ethical development.
Exactly. It's about the whole person.
I like that.
Yeah.
And the book focuses specifically on 2 key aspects: intellectual development and social identity development.
2 big ones.
Okay, let's start with intellectual development. What does the book say about that?
Well, it explains the stages of intellectual development from dualistic thinking,
Okay.
where everything is black and white, to relativistic thinking,
Interesting.
where students can start to grapple with nuanced multiple perspectives.
So it's about recognizing that students might be at different stages in their development, which can impact their ability to engage with complex ideas.
Exactly.
That explains why that economics discussion got so heated. Some students might have been stuck in that dualistic thinking mode,
Right.
making it hard for them to have a nuanced discussion about race and economics. And when it comes to social identity development, the book explores how students' sense of self, especially in relation to their race, their ethnicity, their gender, sexual orientation, other aspects of their identity,
Right.
can shape their experiences in the classroom.
It can be a huge factor.
So it's about creating a classroom environment where everyone feels safe and respected, regardless of their background
Exactly.
or identity.
It's about inclusivity.
The book points out the potential for marginalization in the classroom.
Oh, yeah. Even if it's unintentional.
Right.
If students don't feel seen, heard, respected for who they are.
It's going to impact their learning.
Absolutely.
This makes me think about how I learn best. I know I learn best when I feel like I can be myself and share my own perspectives.
Same here.
Without fear of judgment.
Absolutely. So what are some things educators can do to foster a more inclusive and supportive classroom climate?
Well, I think setting clear ground rules for respectful dialogue is crucial.
That's a good starting point.
Students need to know that it's okay to disagree, but they also need to know how to do so respectfully.
And it's important to model that inclusivity yourself.
Modeling, that's huge.
Use inclusive language.
Mm-hmm.
Be mindful of the diversity of their experiences. Create opportunities for all voices to be heard.
And I think it's also important to be mindful of the impact of stereotypes.
Oh, absolutely.
Sometimes we might unintentionally say or do things that perpetuate harmful stereotypes,
It happens.
even if we don't mean to.
So it's about being self-aware,
Right.
constantly checking our own biases and assumptions.
And being willing to learn from our mistakes.
Yes,
And to make changes when we're called out.
absolutely. This is such important work.
It is. It's about creating a space where everyone feels like they belong and can thrive.
That's the goal.
This deep dive is blowing my mind. Okay. I'm ready for the final principle, which is self-directed learning.
All right, let's wrap it up with self-directed learning.
This one is all about empowering students to take charge of their own learning process.
Well,
It's about moving beyond passively absorbing information to becoming active, engaged learners
right.
who can monitor their own progress and make adjustments as needed.
It's about becoming a lifelong learner.
Exactly. And the book highlights that this isn't something that happens automatically.
No, it takes practice.
Students need guidance and support to develop those self-directed learning skills.
They do. We can't just assume they know how to do it.
So what are some things educators can do to help students become more self-directed?
Well, the book shares a couple of stories that I think really highlight the challenges of self-directed learning.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
There's Melanie, who thinks she's this great writer, but totally bombs her history paper because she procrastinated until the last minute.
Oh, Melanie.
And then there's John, who highlights every single word in his chemistry textbook, but still doesn't understand the concepts.
Been there, done that.
Right? We've all had those students.
Exactly. And I think these stories highlight how students can be overconfident in their abilities or mistake certain study habits for actual understanding.
They don't always know the difference.
They might not even realize what they're doing wrong.
So we have to help them become more self-aware
Right.
and take ownership of their learning.
So how do we do that?
Well, the book breaks down the cycle of self-directed learning into these 6 steps.
Okay.
Assessing the task, evaluating your strengths and weaknesses, planning an approach, applying strategies, monitoring your performance.
Wow, that's a lot.
And then reflecting on what worked and what didn't.
So it's this whole cyclical process.
It is. It's a framework for helping students become more metacognitive.
Metacognitive. There's one of those fancy education words.
I know, right?
What does that actually mean?
It basically means thinking about your thinking.
Uh-huh.
Being aware of your own learning process.
I see.
Your strengths and weaknesses, the strategies that work best for you.
So it's like helping students become their own learning coaches.
Exactly.
I like that.
But the book points out that research has shown that students are often inaccurate in their self-assessments.
Oh, that makes sense.
Which can lead to poor planning and ineffective strategies.
So they need our help to develop that self-awareness.
They do. We can provide clear goals, rubrics, opportunities for self-assessment, and feedback on their learning process, not just the final product.
This is such a valuable principle. I think it's something that we can all benefit from, not just students.
Absolutely. We can all become more self-directed learners in our own lives.
That's a great point. I'm noticing a theme here.
What's that?
It seems like all of these principles apply not just to our students, but to ourselves as well.
Oh, absolutely. We're all lifelong learners, right?
Exactly. And teaching itself is a complex skill that requires constant reflection and refinement.
For sure. We're all on this learning journey together.
We are. All right, so that's a great place to pause for now.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
We've explored these 7 principles of how learning works.
And I'm already feeling inspired.
Me too. And there's so much more to unpack.
I know, right?
So stay tuned, folks, because in the next part of our deep dive,
yes,
we're going to delve even deeper into these principles and explore some of the most fascinating and thought-provoking insights from this book.
Can't wait.
Me neither. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to our deep dive into how learning works. You know, as we were wrapping up the last part, I was struck by how much these principles resonate not just for students, but for us as educators too.
Oh, absolutely.
We're always learning and growing, right?
We are. We have to be.
And speaking of new ideas, there's one thing from the book that really grabbed my attention, and I'm curious to get your take on it.
Okay, I'm listening.
The book mentions this idea that expertise can actually be a barrier to effective teaching.
Oh, that's interesting.
It seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
It does. How so?
Well, because you would think that the more you know about a subject,
right,
the better you would be at teaching it.
Right.
But the book argues that sometimes our expertise can actually get in the way.
Yeah.
I see that. I think we've all experienced that.
Yeah.
Where, as experts, we kind of forget how hard it was to learn these things in the first place.
Exactly.
We chunk information differently. We see patterns that novices miss.
We take shortcuts without even realizing it.
Exactly. It's like we've internalized this whole different language of understanding.
It's like we're speaking fluent subject matter, but our students are just starting to learn the alphabet.
I love that analogy.
And that gap in understanding can make it really tough to break things down in a way that makes sense to students who are just starting out.
Yeah, we have to be mindful of that gap and find ways to bridge it.
I can definitely see that happening in my own teaching.
Oh, me too.
Sometimes I catch myself making assumptions about what students already know, and then I'm surprised when they're completely lost.
It's so easy to do.
It is. We're so deep in our own expertise.
The book reminds us that, effective teaching isn't just about presenting information.
Right.
It's about understanding how students learn and tailoring our approach to meet their needs.
And I think that brings us back to motivation.
Oh, yes, motivation.
Which was such a big aha moment for me reading this book.
A key principle.
Because I know you can't force someone to be motivated.
You can't.
But it seems like there are things we can do to create the conditions for motivation to flourish.
Right. It's about setting the stage.
Exactly. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. I think the book emphasizes that students need to see the value in what they're learning.
Why?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can't just be about memorizing facts for a test.
Right.
It needs to connect to their lives, their goals, their passions.
It's about relevance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Helping students see how the content matters to them.
And I think it's also about fostering a sense of self-efficacy.
Oh, that's so important.
That belief that they can actually succeed if they put in the effort.
Because if they feel like they're constantly failing, or that the material is just too hard,
right,
they're going to lose motivation quickly.
They'll shut down.
And I think that's where feedback comes in too.
Oh, absolutely.
Not just in terms of grades, but in terms of providing students with the support and guidance they need to make progress.
It's about helping them see their own growth.
Exactly. Feedback plays a crucial role in both motivation and mastery.
It's all connected.
It is. It's not just about pointing out mistakes. It's about providing specific, actionable guidance that helps students move closer to their goals.
So it's like being a coach.
I love that analogy.
You're there to cheer them on, but you're also there to give them constructive criticism and help them refine their technique.
Exactly. And speaking of coaches,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot we can learn from the world of athletics when it comes to teaching and learning.
Oh, I love that. Tell me more.
Well, think about how athletes train. They don't just show up and play a game.
Right.
They spend hours practicing, refining their skills, working on their weaknesses.
It's all about that deliberate practice.
Exactly. And they have coaches who provide guidance, feedback, support along the way.
It's that support system.
It is. It's all about deliberate practice and continuous improvement.
And I think that's where the principle of development and climate comes in.
Tell me more about that.
It's about recognizing that students are whole people, not just intellects.
Right.
They come to us with their own unique set of experiences, strengths, and challenges.
And those experiences can profoundly impact their learning.
Absolutely. And we need to be sensitive to that. We need to create a learning environment where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued, regardless of their background or identity.
A sense of belonging.
Exactly. That means fostering a sense of belonging and community, setting clear ground rules for respectful dialogue, and being mindful of the impact of our own biases and assumptions.
That's a tall order.
It is. It's a lot to think about, but it's so important.
It is.
And I'm realizing that creating an inclusive learning environment isn't just about being nice or avoiding offense.
Right.
It's about creating a space where everyone can thrive.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that diversity is a strength, not a weakness.
I love that.
It's about creating a learning environment that's rich with different perspectives and experiences.
And it's about challenging our own biases and assumptions.
So that we can create a truly inclusive and equitable learning experience for all students.
This is making me realize that good teaching is about so much more than just delivering content.
It's about the whole student.
It's about understanding our students, creating a positive and supportive learning environment.
And empowering them.
And empowering them to become self-directed learners.
It's about recognizing the whole student and nurturing their intellectual, social, emotional, and ethical development.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's about helping them become not just successful students, but also engaged and compassionate citizens of the world.
This deep dive is really making me think about my own teaching practices.
Me too. It's challenging.
I'm starting to see areas where I can improve ways I can better support my students and create a more engaging and inclusive learning environment.
I think that's the beauty of engaging with research like this.
It challenges us.
It challenges us to think critically about what we're doing and to constantly strive to improve.
So what are some of the biggest aha moments you've had as you've explored these principles?
One thing that really struck me was the importance of helping students develop metacognitive skills.
Metacognition.
That ability to think about their own thinking.
Thinking about thinking.
I know, right? The book talks about the cycle of self-directed learning, and it really resonated with me.
Tell me more about that.
It's not enough to just tell students to study hard.
Right.
We need to give them the tools and strategies to monitor their own learning,
Okay.
identify their strengths and weaknesses, and make adjustments as needed.
It's giving them that ownership.
Exactly. We need to equip our students with those same skills.
And I think back to my own struggles as a student.
Oh, yeah.
I was always a pretty good student,
Yeah.
but I didn't always know how to study effectively. I would just kind of muddle through, hoping for the best.
I think we've all been there.
It wasn't until I started to really pay attention to my own learning process
Right.
that I started to see significant improvement.
That's when the real learning happens.
Exactly. And that's something that we can all benefit from no matter what stage of life we're in.
It's a lifelong journey.
Speaking of lifelong learning, I'm also struck by the book's concluding message, which is that these principles apply to instructors too.
Oh, for sure.
We're all lifelong learners, and teaching itself is a complex skill that requires constant reflection and refinement.
We're all works in progress.
And that's okay.
It's what makes this work so interesting and rewarding.
So, in your experience, what are some practical things that educators can do to integrate these principles into their teaching?
I think it starts with awareness.
Okay.
We need to be aware of these principles and how they can impact our teaching.
So that first step is just knowing that they exist.
Exactly. And then it's about experimentation.
Okay.
We need to be willing to try new things, to step outside of our comfort zones, and to see what works for us and our students.
It's about being reflective practitioner.
Yes. Constantly evaluating our teaching and looking for ways to improve.
And it's also about collaboration.
Oh, collaboration is key.
We don't have to do this alone.
We can learn from each other, share best practices, and support each other along the way.
I think sometimes as educators, we can get stuck in our own little silos.
It's easy to do.
It is. So it's so important to connect with colleagues, share ideas, and get feedback.
We're all in this together.
So we've talked a lot about the individual principles, but I'm wondering if you can speak to how they all fit together.
Okay.
Is there a unifying thread that runs through them all?
That's a great question. I think the unifying thread is this idea of student-centered learning.
Student-centered learning.
It's about shifting our focus from what we're teaching to how students are learning.
I like that.
It's about recognizing that students are active agents in their own learning and that we need to create environments that support and empower them.
It's about meeting students where they are and helping them reach their full potential.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that learning is this complex and multifaceted process.
Right.
That involves not just intellectual growth, but also social, emotional, and ethical development.
The whole student.
The whole student.
I'm so glad we had this conversation.
Me too.
This deep dive has been such a rich and insightful exploration of the science of learning.
Absolutely.
I feel like I have a whole new toolkit to draw on as I approach my own teaching and learning.
I feel the same way.
And I'm excited to keep exploring these ideas further.
Me too. There's always more to learn. And that's what makes this work so exciting.
But before we move on to the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I have one more question that's been swirling around in my mind.
I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
It's something that the book touches on, but I think it deserves a deeper exploration.
Okay.
How do we reconcile the science of learning with the art of teaching?
Ah, that's the big question.
I mean, we've talked about all these evidence-based principles,
Right.
but teaching isn't just about following a formula, right?
No, it's
There's this magic that happens in the classroom, this spark of connection between teacher and student.
I know exactly what you mean.
That can't be fully captured by research or reduced to a set of strategies.
You've hit on a key point. I think teaching is both an art and a science.
It is.
It's about blending those evidence-based practices with creativity, intuition, and passion.
It's about finding that balance between rigor and creativity, between head and heart.
Exactly. And I think the best teachers I know are those who can seamlessly blend the two.
Yes.
They have a deep understanding of how learning works, but they also bring their own unique style, personality, and passion to the classroom.
They're like master chefs who know the science of cooking, but also have that special something that makes their food truly delicious.
I love that analogy.
And just like a master chef, a master teacher is always learning, growing, and experimenting.
Absolutely.
So how do we find that sweet spot where the science and the art of teaching come together?
You know, I think it starts with a willingness to be both a learner and a teacher.
Okay.
We need to be open to new ideas, to experimenting with different approaches, and to learning from our mistakes.
It's about embracing that growth mindset.
Yes. Not just for our students, but for ourselves as educators.
And it's about recognizing that teaching is a collaborative process.
It is. We need to learn from each other, share best practices, and support each other along the way.
We can observe our colleagues attend workshops, read research articles, and engage in conversations like this one to expand our understanding of the science and the art of teaching.
I love that. It's about building a community of practice.
Yes.
A network of educators who are passionate about learning and teaching and who are committed to continuous improvement.
And I think that's what makes this work so rewarding.
It is.
It's not just about imparting knowledge, it's about fostering connections, sparking curiosity.
And empowering students.
And empowering students to become lifelong learners.
It's about making a difference in the lives of our students and in turn making a difference in the world.
This deep dive has been such a rich and inspiring exploration of the science of learning.
I agree.
I feel like I have a renewed sense of purpose and excitement for my work as an educator, and I'm excited to continue this journey with you.
Me too.
Stay tuned, folks, because we're about to go even deeper. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into how learning works. We've been unpacking these 7 research-based principles, and I'm feeling so energized by all the possibilities. But before we wrap up, I want to revisit a question that's been sort of swirling around in my mind.
Oh, I like it. Fire away.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the science of learning. You know, the research, the principles, the strategies.
All the good stuff.
But teaching isn't just a science, is it?
That's a good point.
It's also an art.
It is.
So how do we balance those two aspects, you know, the head and the heart, to create truly transformative learning experiences.
That's the million-dollar question, right? There's this magic that happens in the classroom sometimes.
There is.
You know, that spark of connection between the teacher and the student that you just can't fully capture with, a textbook or a research study.
Exactly. It's about those aha moments that you see in a student's eyes when something clicks for them.
I love those moments.
It's about connecting with them on a human level, inspiring them, challenging them, and supporting them on their learning journeys.
Absolutely. And I think those moments often come from those intangible qualities that are hard to quantify or measure.
The things you can't put into a rubric.
Exactly. The way a teacher tells a story, the way they connect a concept to a student's personal experience, the way they create a sense of wonder and excitement in the classroom.
That's the art of teaching.
It is.
It's about creating a learning environment where students feel safe to take risks, to make mistakes, to ask questions, to explore their own ideas.
It's about nurturing that intrinsic motivation that makes them want to learn for the sake of learning.
Exactly. And I think that's where the art of teaching intersects with the science of learning.
Tell me more about that.
When we understand how learning works, we can create the conditions for those magical moments to happen.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
We can design experiences that tap into students' intrinsic motivation, that challenge them in just the right way, that provide them with the support and feedback they need to grow.
So it's not about choosing one over the other, science or art.
Right.
It's about weaving them together.
It's a tapestry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Creating a tapestry of learning that's both rigorous and engaging, both head and heart.
And I think the best teachers I know are those who can do that seamlessly.
They make it look easy.
They do. They have a deep understanding of the research.
Right.
But they also bring their own unique style and personality to the classroom.
It's like those master chefs.
Oh, yes.
You know, the ones who know all the techniques, the science of cooking?
Right.
But they also have that special something that makes their food truly delicious.
It's that extra flair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just like a master chef, a master teacher is always learning, growing, experimenting.
So how do we find that balance in our own teaching? How do we cultivate both the science and the art?
That's the big question.
Mm-hmm.
I think it starts with a willingness to be both a learner and a teacher.
Okay.
We need to be open to new ideas, to experimenting with different approaches, and to learning from our mistakes.
It's about embracing that growth mindset.
Yes. Not just for our students, but for ourselves as educators.
And it's about recognizing that teaching is a collaborative process.
It takes a village.
It does. We need to learn from each other, share best practices, and support each other along the way.
That's why I love these conversations.
Me too. They're so inspiring. We can observe our colleagues attend workshops, read research articles, engage in discussions like this one to expand our understanding of the science and the art of teaching.
I think that's what makes this work so rewarding.
It is.
It's not just about imparting knowledge. It's about fostering connections, sparking curiosity, and empowering students to become lifelong learners.
It's about making a difference in the lives of our students and, in turn, making a difference in the world. So well said. And that actually brings us to the end of our deep dive into how learning works.
It's flown by.
It has. But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
There's always more to learn.
Absolutely. But I hope this conversation has sparked some new ideas and inspiration for you.
Me too. I think the key takeaway is that teaching is a complex and multifaceted process.
It's both an art and a science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when we embrace both, we can create truly transformative learning experiences for our students.
And for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of exploration and discovery, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of education.